everybody. I think we're just going to start in about 10 seconds. I'm Jodie. I'm facilitating the discussion today. So with the pleasure of hearing my voice and seeing my face, which is very exciting. We might kick off. So my pronouns are she, her. And thank you so much for coming along. I want to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land from which I'm dialing in today, which are the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. Pay my respects to elders past and present. I also want to acknowledge the Ngunnawal people, which is where I grew up in Canberra, where I spent all of my childhood. So whilst I live here in Wurundjeri country, I did grow up in Ngunnawal and want to pay respects to them as well for continuing to care for the land and waters where I grew up. If you really want you to start using the chat and having a convo today, so if you can see the chat function on the right-hand side there, feel free to jump in. Also pop whatever land you're on. I'm always curious to see where people are dialing in from and start some conversations that way. If you're not sure which land you're on today, do some Googling and find out and then pop it in the chat. We've got a fantastic panel of speakers today. I might do a quick intro on me initially, just so you know who you're speaking to. I'm the talent acquisition lead at the Level Crossing Removal Project. I'm also a proud queer ADHD woman. I was late diagnosed last year, and hence I'm very passionate about neurodiverse-friendly workplaces and neurodiverse-friendly experiences throughout a recruitment process, because I am one of the recipients of those and have experienced some horrendous processes in the past. So very passionate about it. I'm going through at the moment, I guess, understanding my brain, and I do tend to get really excited and jump in and talk over people, which I'm going to try very hard not to do today. And to the panel, if they're listening, if you hear me doing that, feel free to tell me to shush. I'm not precious. That's totally fine. So we might do a quick whip around. I want to introduce others in the room as we go who we speak on the panel today. But I do want to encourage you again to use the chat. We're also just about to launch a poll, because we're very curious to know where you're up to in your neurodiverse inclusive recruitment processes. So if you can jump into the poll as well, which is in the interactions channel there on the right, and have a vote on where you're up to, that would be awesome. So we might do a quick rip around the room. I might kick over to you, Dave, as the first to introduce yourself.
Hi there, I'm David Clarkson. I'm the Head of Marketing at Tesco.
Thank you so much. And now, who did I put next on the list? Aaron. Aaron.
I was ready to click. I was hoping. Hey guys, great to be here. I'm Aaron Mercer. I'm part of the founding team at Exceptional. We specialise in neurodivergent recruitment and training employers on inclusion. I'm an ADHDer. I've known that about myself a long time, and I spend a lot of time speaking with businesses who want to be more intentional about how they include people like me and Jodie, because we're awesome.
We are, aren't we? Awesome. Thanks, Aaron. We've got Lou as well.
Yes. Hi, everyone. I'm Lou Zonetti. I'm the founder and managing director at Brightworks. Brightworks is an early careers consultancy. So we support organisations to establish, recruit and develop their early careers talent. And my reason for being on the call today is, well, first of all, we know that a lot of Gen Z particularly are very aware of their diagnosis around neurodiversity, and we are working with lots of neurodivergent candidates and graduates in our space. And also I have personal connection because I'm a mum of a neurodiverse child, I have neurodiverse siblings, and I'm also exploring my own neurodiverse assessment at the moment, and I suspect an ADHD diagnosis will come soon enough. So that's me. I'm Lou, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation.
Awesome, Jodie here. Thank you so much, Lou. And then finally, we've got Jen as well from Little Pay.
Sorry, good morning, everyone. I'm Global Head of People and Culture from Little Pay, coming from NARM in Melbourne.
Awesome. Thanks, panel. Did everyone want to jump back on in terms of the panel? Feel free to jump back in, and we might kick off the discussion today. As I said, I'm very passionate about this. I want to talk about, we are going to talk about neurodiverse friendly hiring practices, but also what to do when you have the people there, how you're going to make it a safe place for them. So I might pass over to Dave just to do a bit of an intro on why it's important to have this discussion.
Yeah, no worries. First of all, thanks everyone for joining. I understand that we're close to beating the ATC's record for webinar sign-ups and attendance, so this is all quite happy and obviously quite a popular topic. So I guess first of all, I'm from TestGrid, so we are founded in 1999, Australian-owned employment testing and HR technology assessment company. And yeah, it was myself that kind of came up with the idea for this presentation last year, or webinar discussion, not sure what to call it yet. And it was off the back of going to a lot of really amazing events last year and about neurodiversity. So that was either talks, presentations, webinars, etc. And like I said, some really amazing insights and kind of lived experience given there. However, I always kind of felt that the kind of commercial outcome and commercial focus was somewhat lacking, although there was a lot of mention of like the various challenges and like neurodiverse people being out of work and things like that, and also some tips and advice for hiring. That latter part was always a bit lacking. There was a lot of amazing and inspiring stories, but I always felt like it was just a bit overly emotive. Kind of like I said, lots of individual stories, mentioned those challenges, with not too much of the benefits, and that's just my own kind of personal experience. So just that kind of lack of commercial focus, really, in terms of like why would you hire someone in the first place. So yeah, because you might be wondering why is the marketing guy on the webinar, and that was the reason for it. Just how it's been communicated, how neurodiversity has been communicated into the market. Like I mentioned, it was just a lot of, you can really see the challenges and things like that that's involved in hiring, whereas the conversation needs to move on from that. So I really want to advance the conversation today and talk about those benefits, and the rest of the panel can chat about their own experiences. So yeah, I'll just move on to that first slide. Alrighty, so going back to basics here. So this is my own kind of personal hypothesis here. From what I saw and what I've seen so far, I mean, I know there's a lot of good stats online and about hiring neurodiverse candidates. I just feel the current narrative around it is, like I mentioned, that kind of emotive kind of conversation, and it's like almost kind of lands in like a kind of charity or doing someone a favor or a cause, for example. And it's like, okay, this is why you should be hiring neurodiverse candidates or neurodivergent candidates, and it kind of falls under these kind of top two here on the right hand side, existential and marketing needs. And so it could be that, or that this aligns with our values and things like that, or our marketing needs to kind of communicate out to the market. This is something we do, but ultimately what I feel is lacking from what I'm seeing from a communications perspective is those operational needs. And my hypothesis part is, when it comes to hiring a neurodiverse candidate, based on the current narrative that's out there, neurodiverse candidates fall into the too hard basket when it comes to actually making that final hiring decision. And what we're looking to do is kind of challenge that today and provide some insights that go against that. So just on that, for example, there's a lot of benefits that we're going to talk about today of hiring neurodiverse candidates that really need to be focused on a lot more. I mean, such as like neurodiverse candidates being like, I mean, it's JP Morgan data, but 48% faster than neurotypical, and something like 92% more productive. And I know Aaron's got some stats that you can share as well, and just on those benefits. So what I wanted to do was gather, get on the screen basically, and share some stories and some insights, and from TestGrid partners, customers, and thought leaders today. Because what I find is, I think damaging is too strong of a word, but I don't really want to put out another piece of content, as all communications are defined as these days, that doesn't advance that conversation. There's a lot of kind of what is neurodiversity kind of out there, and I do feel we're kind of stuck there. So I really want to advance the conversation. So there will be a bit of that, of course, and about language, etc. But then moving on to, okay, what can you do with your recruitment process, and then what can you do within accommodations can be made within the organisation. And just on that last point, I'll say that I do believe there is a bit of a barrier in terms of what needs to be done within the organisation. It's great. Okay, we're going to hire a neurodiverse person. What we're going to do, and I understand there is some accommodations. In some cases where headphones are required and things like that, but taking into consideration that 15 to 20% of the global population are neurodiverse, and so that means 15 to 20% of your candidates, the employees, are already neurodiverse. So these accommodations we're talking about, they need to not be viewed as, okay, we're hiring a neurodiverse person. I think a psychological safety lens needs to be put on it. And those accommodations just need to be implemented in the business anyway. And I know there's some examples of that. And that's something that Tesco have done within our hiring process. And we've proudly say that we've hired a number of neurodiverse people and various other diverse people, basically, let's call it that. So yeah, I'll leave it there and we can move on from the conversation. But yeah.
Thanks, Dave. I think that's really interesting, some of the stats that you brought up there. I know Aaron's about to dive into this, but the stats are that there's such a huge chunk of our population is neurodiverse. It's really likely that there's people in your organisation that are neurodiverse and maybe don't know it yet or haven't told you. So, but I might ask Aaron just to elaborate a bit on what is neurodiversity. What does it mean?
Look, thanks, Jodie, and thanks, Dave. I think as a starting point, it's a term that is often misunderstood and misrepresented. So the term neurodiversity was actually coined by a Sydney-based woman called Judy Singer in the late 1990s, and she's a social scientist, and she's one of the first people to really challenge the medical model understanding of conditions such as autism, ADHD, which I have, dyslexia, dyspraxia, and actually acknowledge that, yes, while there are some challenges with those conditions, there are real strengths. And so kind of flipping it, which is, we're going to get to strengths-based recruitment a little later, but the kind of term came from that research in the late 1990s. And so the term neurodivergent means different from the norm, and it's an umbrella term. It is often associated with conditions such as ADHD, autism, dyspraxia, dyslexia. It overwhelmingly, though, if you read about anything around this topic, it can be used interchangeably with autism, and that's simply not the full picture of being neurodivergent. A couple of kind of things that we're seeing, just deviate a little bit from just the standard definition. One is, we've got people on this call that kind of diagnosed recently. We've seen a spike, particularly among women, diagnosed in the last 5 years. And some of that has been because of changes with COVID, led to a spike in diagnosis. But also there's a growing understanding that the diagnostic tools that I went through, and I've had family members go through this, that typically are biased towards a representation of men and boys over girls and women. And so our understanding of the nuance between how something like ADHD or autism might present in men versus women is changing, and that's leading to an increase in diagnosis. I love what Lou said before around Gen Z having a growing understanding of neurodivergence and actually being open about that in the process. There's some stats that suggest up to 90% of people with any form of invisible disability or condition don't disclose that through an interview process or whilst working. And so, employers need to work hard to create a culture where they kind of earn the right for people to share that about themselves. And it also needs to be relevant.
Yeah, I love that.
A little bit, but I sometimes do that.
No, it's very good. I feel you. And I think that's really nice to talk about. They need to earn the right to have people share that with them. It is a privilege if we decide to disclose it. Although I think with me, same as you, Aaron, potentially Lou, it's very obvious. But I might pass over to Lou now just to talk around, I guess, what are some of the unintentional barriers that processes can have that might hinder neurodiverse people coming through?
Yeah, I'd like to pick up from where Aaron left off in terms of those numbers of people coming through a process. So the first thing I would say is that with our recruitment processes at Brightworks, the clients we work with, we're very neuropositive in terms of the way we approach things, and we give candidates a really good opportunity to tell us what they might need. And we also use exceptional testing for neurodiverse candidates. So we actually go through a separate process in terms of the testing for those candidates. And as a hugely neuropositive company, if that's even a word, we still have candidates who are not telling us that they're neurodiverse. So there is a barrier there in people disclosing that, even with companies who are I think quite forward-facing with neuropositivity. The other thing I would say as well in this conversation is that one of the barriers that I know many neurodiverse people face is that when you say that you are neurodivergent, that means something to that other person. They'll make an assessment about what that means. So some people don't feel comfortable sharing that because people tend to put you in categories or say, well, I knew a child that had this, so therefore everyone is like this. But as we know, everyone is different. It doesn't really matter if someone's got ADHD or not. They can display lots of different attributes, skills, capabilities within that. So there's a lot of hesitation around disclosure because of those reasons around judgment, I guess, and people not really understanding. In terms of the actual barriers in a hiring process, I think there's can be broken into probably three key parts. It's first of all in the attraction process. So the way that job ads are written, designed, formatted can be a barrier for people who are neurodivergent. They might read that a particular skill is needed and take that quite literally about whether they actually have that skill, whether they could be an appropriate candidate. There may be lack of information in that application form or job ad around the hiring process. So there's uncertainty there because they don't know what the next steps might look like, and that creates some uncertainty. And even some advertising can be in rich media formats. So it could have flashing, moving parts, things that make it a little bit difficult for people who need something that's a little bit more static. The second part is really around that assessment process prior to an interview. So this is where people are encouraged to disclose in some cases, and some companies don't offer that opportunity for people to say what they need. But certainly what we're finding, particularly with Gen Z mainly, is that the assessments are not necessarily suitable in graduate and internship recruitment for people who are neurodivergent. Particularly around time-based assessments and also one-way video interviews. So being really mindful around those volume recruitment technology or volume recruitment processes. They're really useful in helping companies go through a big group of people, make sure they're making the right hiring decisions, really making sure that they don't disadvantage people that they are not optimal for. And then the final barrier is really in that interview process. We know that some people are just really good at interviews. That does not necessarily mean that they're really good at the job as well. But in terms of interview processes, both face-to-face and online interviews can really create a lot of discomfort, but also distress for people who are neurodivergent. If it's face-to-face, they've got to navigate getting there, not knowing necessarily who they're meeting, being able to have some sort of level of control over the environment that conversation will take place in. Similarly, online, it's very difficult to build rapport with people online, and some neurodivergent people might struggle with those components anyway. So there's a lot of barriers that we're seeing through the process. And I think today we are going to focus on knowing what those barriers might be. And I think people on the call being talent acquisition specialists, HR specialists will also be aware of these things, but we're also going to help by giving some hacks and tips. So it's not all about what's wrong. We're also going to be talking about what we can do about it.
I love that. And I think you made a really good point there, is that asking people what they need, they're going to know best and what's going to get the best out of them. And it doesn't even mean that they're neurodiverse. It just means that this is going to get the best out of them throughout that process. So that's really great. Thank you, Lou. So I might pass over to Jen and Aaron just to talk through a little bit of that strengths-based approach to hiring, which I am so passionate about and really excited to hear about. So yeah, let's hear a bit more about that.
Thank you. Yeah, I think basically when you're trying to hire someone, you're trying to get an authentic view of who that person is. And I think that regardless of their neurotype, if you can develop rapport with someone, that's always got to be the key goal for us, because then your stress levels come down, you get out of a little bit more out of fight or flight, and you can be a bit more of a genuine interaction with someone. So I think it's about reducing stress for the candidate, really. And because I don't see much point in having someone be stressed in an interview. Unless you're an air traffic controller, you probably need to manage stress, but you don't have to have that level of stress management in most of our jobs. So I think that developing rapport with someone is about getting them to be not stressed, and that may be that you're giving them the questions in advance. That may be that I spoke to one of our candidates who came, our employees who came through Exceptional just in preparation for today. And she said, I remember, Jen, you sat side by side with me on a table, and that was way less intense. And I just didn't feel like I had to be having this intense, front facing. So I tend to do that around a table. I tend to sit on a corner so that I can sort of ease into that eye contact. People have different ways they feel comfortable with body language and eye contact and things like that. So I think you can just sort of disrupt some of those more formal, stuffy processes, be a bit less professional, and, just be good to another human who's a bit stressed about doing a job interview.
Yep.
I love that, Jen. So often the perception is that if you're going to make changes for people who are neurodivergent or anyone, those changes are going to be timely, they're going to be costly. Jen just shifting her position in kind of seating, going from being more collaborative, sitting aside, to less confrontational. Like there's pretty sure you weren't charged for that kind of that hack. So quite often the changes are really quite modest. They're not much of an impasse on the interviewer, and they can pay great dividends. That's terrific.
I also think, sorry, we're all going to interrupt each other, aren't you? The other thing that I just want to add to that is it normalises difference. It normalises accommodation. And I think that if you model that as a company, whether it's through the advertising process, the interview process, or beyond, you can just normalise the difference and the accommodation. And I just think, don't worry about being professional. Don't worry about posh stuff. It doesn't matter. You're much better off even in the most sort of high executive roles that we've recruited for. If you can just be a human talking to another human, you're going to get a much better assessment both ways, the candidate of you as well. So I think that's that normalization of difference as well.
That's
just want to add one thing. If we're going to adopt a strengths-based approach, we need to understand how different neurotypes best demonstrate that strength. And yes, everyone is different, but what we've found, particularly for autistic people that might struggle more than others in a social scenario, such as an interview, providing them an opportunity to demonstrate what they can do, whether that is a work sample. I used the example the other day that if we were selectors for a football team and we needed a new fullback, we wouldn't get the person in a room and ask them abstract questions. We'd watch the tape of them playing in the juniors or for another club, as an example. So it's actually giving them an opportunity to demonstrate what they can do. Jen talked about building rapport. I would say as well, to add to that, is to lower the sensory challenges. So lower the unknowns. So Jen's talking about giving people questions in advance. One of the biggest areas I see people getting tripped up on is having meetings offsite in a cafe. Personally, I find it really hard to pay attention to the person I'm having a conversation with and trying to build rapport and influence. There's lots of things going on, lots of sounds, lots of smells. So for anyone that's got sensory sensitivities or social anxiety, you are at the outset putting them at the end of the queue in terms of their ability to kind of communicate. So just kind of thinking through simple things like that, you might think it's disarming and friendly to do so, but really you are putting people at a disadvantage and may not even know that.
So true. I think there's been an interesting question come up in the chat from Kelly, just around like all that stuff is all well and good if you're doing like one-to-one hiring, but what about volume recruitment? So we can't, you've got 1,000 applicants, you can't exactly make accommodations or for one person in particular, or can you? Has anyone got, I know Lou, you've popped in there, you wouldn't mind answering that one if you want to, around how we can change the way we volume recruit and make it neurodiverse friendly as well?
Yeah, I mean, yes, I actually think there's quite a lot you can do at volume. So I mean, without going into the specific details, and hello, Kelly, I know you very well. So hello, it's nice to see you on the call. I think that it depends on your applicant tracking system that you are using, but whether you can create automations through that system or not to be able to flag candidates that you might need to review in a bit more detail. And that's certainly what we're doing, so that we can actually read those accommodations that might be required for people who are either neurodivergent or may have another requirement, whether that's through a disability or they might need another adjustment for whatever reason. So it's mainly, and I would say, like, I didn't mean to make this point before, but I forgot, we've got a very low number who are identifying. It's not huge numbers. So even though we talk about 15 to 20% or 30 to 40% of the population being neurodivergent, and it depends where you look at your statistics to get that data, the reality is with volume recruitment or any recruitment, people aren't disclosing this. So it's actually not thousands of people or even hundreds of people. In my experience, you're really looking at 2 to 4% of your hiring pool, where you might need to do an extra review and make some decisions with the client in our case, but as with an internal process around, well, what can you do and what conversations are you willing to have? What could you do to ask that person about what they might need, and then making an assessment about what's appropriate. So I guess I'm saying I think there's a lot of stuff that you can do, and I wouldn't be shying away from the number, because it's actually less people than you think it might be, but it has a huge impact on the candidate experience overall, both for neurodivergent people who feel supported and able to be able to have that conversation, but also for neurotypical people who can see that you're making an effort, and especially for young people, they're looking for companies that are inclusive and diverse and are doing all these values-led initiatives. So I think it's got a lot of benefits to do it, but I appreciate for some it might be a bit of extra work.
Yep. So true. And I think it's a good point as well, is that sometimes, well, all the time, actually, I don't know of any accommodation that can be made that isn't actually beneficial for everybody. Even for just setting the questions up front, everyone wants that, surely. No one likes a surprise question. And I'm just going to ask one more question here and slot it in from Joanna around what point in the recruitment process should we be asking people to disclose, and should we be checking in around accommodations? Who'd like to answer that one? Lou or Jen or Aaron?
I'll jump in and say, I don't think it's not the role of the recruiter to ask someone to disclose. As really back to that point of how are you earning the right? So how are you? Jen talked about normalizing the behavior. You might want to actually kind of model that and like what stories you're telling about not just the individual contributor that's come in and is doing a role in DevOps or user experience. It's how you're actually celebrating difference and actually earning the right. It's not a recruiter's job. I would pretty much suggest it's probably illegal to ask people to disclose certain things through the recruitment process. So I think it's being overt about it. And I would suggest on the job ad at the bottom, you say actually you're kind of celebrating. And to Dave's point at the start, this is not a charitable endeavor. I was once introduced to a panel interview and to a panel from a CTO of an organization who at the end said, "This is a great cause. We need to get on board." And I didn't correct them in the moment. I probably should have. Maybe they'll watch this webinar. But it's not about charity. It's actually about strength. So I would have that, the celebration of the fact that you want all kinds of minds. You need all kinds of minds to be successful. And I would have that in the job ad.
And we talk about the diversity of our team pretty quickly as well through a process, which again just normalise diversity, normalise difference, normalise the accommodations. We talk about the fact that our diverse team is actually our strength. So you're signalling to people that psychological safety, and you're signalling to people that, you know, one thing I noted to mention today around, you know, that solving, if you talk about economic rationalism of this, even the things the muscles we exercise in solving the challenge of inclusivity are exactly the same brain muscles that solve real world problems, that provide good business solutions, that get our brains thinking about really interesting solutions to tricky problems. So it actually is just something we ought to be thinking about as a day-to-day practice in what we do to accommodate those around us.
Yep, totally agree. Was there anything you wanted to add, Lou?
It's a tricky one, isn't it? I think that I appreciate what's been said, and I think that that's a really good point around making sure that we've talked about this in the grad community around showcasing the variety of people that you have in the roles in your businesses. I think I would still come back to, we need to have a way of helping, making sure that the process is going to let everyone shine. And so an example of that I would give is in a group exercise. So often in a volume recruitment model, they might have an individual sort of screening process with an application form, then some sort of testing, then some sort of one-way video interview, and then the final stage is sometimes a one-on-one interview, or it might be an assessment center or engagement center environment where people are doing a group activity. Now, my thought is that each of those stages needs to be well designed to make sure that it's accommodating people, all sorts of people through that process. A lot of engagement center activities are actually geared towards people who are a little bit more extroverted in nature. And so if that's a requirement of your role, which I don't think it is for many roles, I've never seen a job where that's a competency that's required. I think it's just being really mindful about what are you asking people to do to actually demonstrate they've got the skill that they need to have in the job. And to Aaron's point before around really looking at like strengths-based hiring. So getting people looking at the data and the assessments you're asking people to go through a selection process to make sure that it's actually what you need at the end of the day for a job. So, for example, if someone doesn't need to be able to present as part of their job, don't get them to present in a group activity, because they don't need to do that. That's not something you're assessing them on. And if you do have parts of your grad program where people do need to be able to present, they might be in a sales role, they might be in a marketing role, whatever it is, you might actually need to have separate exercises that you're getting them to do, because you've built the tool around engaging people with the right skills for the jobs, and those skills are very different. So I haven't really, I don't know. I still think I would probably say I think it is good to know, because and give people the option to share, just like we give people the option to share about their pronouns. We give people the option to share what their preferred name is. We give people the option to share whether they need an accommodation, whether that's because of their travel, their state, they're in a wheelchair. And this happens. We see this in our process, and it allows us to know who's coming through the process and what individual conversations do we need to have with people so that they're comfortable. What I would say is, don't ask the question if you're not going to do anything about it. Don't ask the question if you think giving someone 5 minutes extra time on a video interview is enough, because it's actually not. And so if your accommodation is, I'll just give you more time, but I'm going to do exactly the same process, but you've identified that you need something different, but I'm not willing to accommodate that, don't ask in the first place. And actually, I think there's a lot of room there to check in on ourselves.
And Lou, to your point before around millennials being more aware of their own neurodivergence, they're going to vote with their feet in terms of the kinds of roles they're going to apply for. So really, as employers and as talent specialists on the call, it's how do you actually, make these accommodations, but actually, like, there's skills out there that you're missing out on. You're talking about 2 to 4%, Lou, and 15% of the population. So among your customer base in the communities you live in, there are neurodivergent people everywhere, but you're missing out on them if you're showing inflexibility in your process.
Yep.
Aaron, can I pop in with a question? I mean, how often, when we're talking about these accommodations that are made, how often do they come up in terms of, on a spectrum of accommodations from don't do an interview in a coffee shop, or to, I mean, what's one of the most extreme, having to wear noise cancelling headphones? I mean, how often is it the extreme end of that spectrum? Or is it the majority of the time, is it just minor adjustments that we spoke about just now? Yeah.
It really depends. Oh, sorry, you go, Jen. No, you go.
We had a fellow come through Exceptional who had some requests for an interview, but it was really important to then go with the interview on the day, because actually as the interview progressed, he developed such confidence. We were just having a lot of a lovely back and forth, and I ended up saying to him, do you mind if we go off the script a little bit? I'm enjoying this chat and it sounds like you're feeling comfortable. Are you okay if we ask questions that aren't on the list? And he said, oh, absolutely, I don't feel worried anymore. And off we went, and that was it. So I think just managing that, there may be, and we've got a number of neurodivergent staff who have had accommodation requests initially, but check in with them. They may want to have a different day. We all have different days where we have different requirements too. So I think it's just about keeping flexible as well.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. And I think it's good as well that to ask if people, if they're feeling comfortable. I guess where I work in the government, we can't go off script, so we've got a set script. But I think it's important to ask, is this going to work okay for you, and create an equitable process so that everyone's going to get a fair go. So I love that. I might just quickly move into the next stage, which is more once you've found the neurodiverse people, how are we supporting them and what needs to happen once they're in. Jen and Lou, who would like to go in that one? Lou. Mike off first, or Jen?
Go, Jen.
Go, Jen.
Once the candidates are in place, that I think that we've had things like, I was chatting with the panel before this, that we've got fidget toys on pretty much everyone's desk. Our CEO sits there at his desk chatting to people with something that he's fidgeting with. We put a big bowl of them out and said, have a try of these, see which one you like, see which one serves your purpose. And it was lovely because everyone was just huddled around the bowl, feeling squishy things and going, yeah, yuck. And then someone else would say, that's great. And then someone else liked the clicky noise and someone else hated it. And it was just a lovely visualization of everyone's differences and how they responded to these inputs. But it just normalized the fact that, we all sit there, and whether it's a pen before they had fidget toys, or whatever it may be, a stapler or whatever we're fidgeting with, that sometimes that helps in meetings. So that's one of the things we do. We've got dimmer switches because I don't think anyone likes fluoro lights, but it's actually a really nice thing to be able to customize that for the team a bit. And as it turned out, a bit like we've said before, a lot of people said, oh, that's helped my migraine so much, being able to turn that down a bit. So you often just get the best out of more people. So inclusive practice is just good practice, really.
And Jen, how did you know that those accommodations were important?
I tend to just check in with people. It's often just seeing someone, observing your team when they're coming into the office, having a chat with people, offering your own up first and saying, oh, I really find these lights horrible, and people then feel more comfortable to talk about things. We just keep sort of cycling through various things that people might be thinking about. Speak to experts, talk to Exceptional, and find out what are some common things that people feel. We even had conversations with a staff member about how they process oral language differently from visual language. So reading, they can read fast. They can't process oral language, which is an interesting one for cameras off. I want to throw into the mix too. We often think cameras off reduces anxiety in neurodivergent people. Not necessarily. Some people require the visual input of someone's lips moving in order to process oral language. So it really isn't a one size fits all. And just being open about these. You do the training that Exceptional offer. We had a heap of people come out of the woodwork and go, oh, fancy that. I think I might need to go and do some assessments.
Yeah, I think you make a good point. Not about our training, but by all means, contact us and we can do some. But you're curious about your people, I would say. And so the kind of approach is you're asking the people and you're also modeling it, which is fantastic.
Yep. Yeah, definitely.
Can I just build on what's been said, because there's so many good points that have been raised. And I think that as to start, for those that maybe are not as in tune as Jen is with her staff as well, it can also be really helpful to have work plans with all your staff. So everyone has different things that they like, whether they're neurodivergent or neurotypical. We have different ways we like to work. Some people like to work early. I like to meeting stack. I call it meeting stack, so that I've got all my meetings like in this intense like period of time. And then I've got time to do deep work. I find it really hard to switch tasks. So that's how I like to work. And so it's about having to go back to Aaron's observation of Jen. It's that curiosity and really understanding like what is going to set you up for success for all of the individuals in your team. So that could be style of work, that could be how you work, like in terms of timing, where you work, whether you need to create time for deep work, whether you need to take time for collaboration work. The other things I've seen work really successfully is buddy mentor kind of relationships for people who might really benefit from that. Extra breaks for people, or spacing out like lunch break throughout the day. So instead of having like half an hour or 45 minutes for lunch, they might just be like, I just want 5 minutes every hour because it helps me reset. So just really creating personalized and individualized work plans for people. People are adults. People know what they need. And we all do, whether you identify as neurodivergent or not. And I think we need to really be looking to people to like and giving them the ideas around what that could look like is really helpful, I think, as well. And there's lots of different options that are going to work for different types of companies and different people.
And probably not assuming, if I can tell one quick anecdote, speaking to one organisation that had someone come in they knew was neurodivergent, they had a kind of blended environment, working sometimes in the office and sometimes not. And Jen talked about lighting before. Basically what this organisation did was turn all the lights off. So they essentially worked in kind of twilight dark, because they assumed, they didn't ask, like Jen and Lou were talking about, they assumed that this person is going to be stressed out by the overhead lights. And they used to play music as well. So they turned off the music that used to be playing. It wasn't loud music, but through the day. And 3 months in, this person says, why do you people work in the dark? Like, oh, yeah, that's for you. Why? How
odd.
But these things are out there. We kind of assume, people need to be managed with cotton wool and in certain environments. But it's a funny example, but there'd be thousands of cases of either an organisation or a manager of a team making assumptions based on
what they think they know.
What they think they know.
I think that's it's so important, Aaron. I had a chat with one of our team members as well just recently, and I think one of my absolute take home is assume competence, because we had a staff member whose stress were actually getting quite high. And it was interesting. My first instinct was to try and sort of cotton wool and work out how to reduce their workload and things like that. In talking to them, I actually did the opposite, and we upped the ante, because this person's brain was a V8 engine and they were sitting there puttering around or kiddie court. And the minute I put them to a task that had a bit of meat in it, wow, they flew, and they started to just have their stress levels have dropped. They've now got their brain engaged in some interesting meaty stuff, and they're not worried about they're not left to that sort of vacuum of, boring thought when you're just feeling a bit bored. And it's like kids in schools who misbehave are often neurodivergent kids who haven't got something good to do. So give people a really interesting problem to solve, and just try that sometimes, because actually dumbing that down and reducing your workload because you've decided they're not capable, in fact they just haven't got the right tram track, and just seeing people flourish, it's so lovely. So try different things, and just assume competence. There's really clever brains out there and they can do cool stuff.
Yeah, I think that's the really great points. And I heard Lou say something before around giving people 5 extra minutes and just doing that for everyone. That is actually the worst thing you could ever do for me with ADHD. That would make me really stressed, and I would still do it in the last 30 seconds. So it wouldn't make any difference. All right. Well, I just wanted to reference the poll that we had on before we just passed back to Aaron for some inclusion tips and hacks. And it's really interesting. There's about 45% of people say no, but they are planning to review their organisation's recruitment process to ensure it's accessible and inclusive. 37% said yes, and there was about 10% and 8% that said no, we haven't considered it, or they've done one in the past. So I thought that was a really interesting note, is that it looks like the majority of people are planning to do this. And I think that's where it ties in now to you, Aaron, with your inclusion hacks. Do you want to give us some hacks on how they can go about?
Yeah, I might stick to these. We've talked about some fantastic kind of themes, curiosity, checking our biases, not assuming, this not being a charitable endeavor, but kind of practically. And I loved how Lou, much more kind of structured than mine, thinking through attraction, assessment and interview, but looking at the job description. So we know a lot of people who come to us looking for a role will read information that's written quite literally, and so if they see 11 things, if we're using a boilerplate job description and we're just adding to it, not subtracting, we come up with a laundry list of requirements, and someone might read that and not apply as a starting point. The other thing is, I see really commonly used is jargon kind of language. So customer obsession. Yeah. What does that mean? I'm not sure. Things that are kind of over the top language, passionate about this, customer obsession, things like that can really confuse or kind of put people off. Being overt about the fact that you want and need all kinds of minds, not because it's a good thing to do, but because it's good business. It's good for innovation and productivity and retention. So actually being overt about that. Providing an opportunity for people to demonstrate what they can do. Lou or Jen talked about kind of abstract questions and putting people under undue pressure. If that is the role, if your role is negotiating or sales or air traffic control, then yes, great. But if it's not, provide them with a work sample. We had a case a few years ago where a young man came to a workshop in Sydney. This man is selectively mute, non-verbal. His parents told me he's quite chatty around the family home, but essentially won't talk to anyone he doesn't know. But had a big mind. Like won a science competition as a 16-year-old that NASA ran, like some global competition. He had a big mind. We worked with him, got him a work sample for a company based in Brisbane, and he's still there 3 years later, but they did the whole interview over web chat. He has still not said a word to his boss, ever, just web chat. But basically, he provided an opportunity for the person to play, and then saw, wow, the way he's solving these problems is quite profound. But if you took a traditional approach, the phone screen, the panel interview, this person wouldn't have made it very far at all. Provide the questions up front, as we talked about before. And if there's concern that you're providing an unfair advantage, give it to everybody. And yes, you can build on that, but it's taking away the unknowns. So we've done things like using like Google Lens for like journey mapping. So just take away all the stresses. So I'm great when I meet people at first, but I hate filling out forms and getting to a place on time, like navigating where to get to. So as much as you can take the kind of stress levels down and really just understand how these people think and how they might fit in to the team, the better. But give them to everyone. We talked about low sensory environments before, so cafes. Really just like death often for people that have challenges with sensory or social anxiety. assess the environment you're creating, both for staff, check your biases. I didn't talk about it before, but most commonly we see biases or assumptions that are either too high, you're going to get a genius that's going to do the work of 3 people, or too low, as Jen was talking about before. And quite often the people we're talking about just want to get in and just contribute and just do their role. Then they're not all superstars, but your process is probably overlooking them. And focus on the strengths. But yes, some people mightn't like making eye contact. Some people might be poor at filling out online forms. Some people might interrupt you in a meeting, but focus on, what are they great at? One of the questions we ask is, what do you find easy or what have you been told you find easy that others find hard? And really just double clicking on that. What are they great at? Because so often we see what they're not great at in an interview, but really lean into what their strengths are. Look, there's hundreds of these. We write blogs about them all the time. You can check them out, but in the time available, I'd focus on them.
I love that.
Aaron, can I just add, if it's okay? I didn't share at the start, but I'm sitting on the advisory board for Autism South Australia, and they're building an inclusive recruitment toolkit with a government funding. So one of the outcomes is to provide a toolkit for employers to take away some of the nervousness around what do I do, when do I do it, what are some ideas that we can implement really easily, what are some things that we might need a bit more time and stakeholder engagement to do. And so that toolkit will focus mainly on the hiring process, but also on the, once people have been hired and they're in the job, and it's going to be available for free. So if anyone is interested in taking these inclusion hacks and actually going a little bit deeper, there is that report that is coming out this year like I said, it's through Autism South Australia, but it's actually a neurodivergent toolkit and it's human centered in terms of the design, being built by people who work in the recruitment side of things, but also people who are neurodivergent themselves. It's been a great process to go through. So if anyone is interested in that as well, very happy to send me a DM on LinkedIn, and I'll send it through as soon as it's finished, because I think it's going to be an amazing tool.
Yeah, brilliant. I'm loving that employers are starting to do this themselves and open source it. So we contributed to one that QBE Insurance put out last week. I know I actually spoke to the South Australian government this week, and I know they've got that that initiative underway. I love the fact that sort of information is being open sourced into the community. That's brilliant.
So good. Anyone that follows me knows I'm a big fan of even just giving the interview questions up front. We've just started doing that at LX, and people will often be like, oh, they'll be able to cheat and come up with a question before or an answer beforehand. And I can tell you now, you will know immediately. You will know if they've chat GPT'd that answer, especially when you probe in and ask more questions. So I might pass over on that note to do some question Q&A with the audience. So if you've got more questions, keep popping them in the chat. We've only got 7 minutes left, so we may not get to all of them, but we'll try and get to most. I might go to, I've got one here from Maddie. So how do you recommend approaching conversations with execs to move traditionally operational and transactional business functions like recruitment, considering D&I adjustments is everyone's responsibility, not just the D&I team? So how do you have that conversation with them so that they don't just put it on D&I, but it's everyone's responsibility? Who wants to answer that one? I'm open to.
I'll go for this one then. I really love this question because it's literally the entire point of the today's webinar. For me, for what I do, my kind of main goal with all the content that TestGrid produces is it always has an action for anyone who's reading it. Okay, here's an interesting piece of research. How can we implement it? So for me, it would be to speak about the accommodations, etc., that's been mentioned today. Take that view of those accommodations can be made for. It's not just one person, but everyone. But I would bring it back into those kind of those commercial outcomes. I mean, like I mentioned earlier on, there's Aaron, I know you've got on your site about 92% retention within the first year. for example, things like that. I would just focus on the business metrics. So going back to my point, because I was making a joke before this, I sound so heartless to be focused on the business metrics and things like that. But with that old stat that 80% of CEOs are psychopaths, maybe going in with a sheet of stats is a good idea for someone who really cares about the numbers. But of course, your motivations are a lot wider than that.
Yep.
So yeah, that would be what I would do.
Yeah, I think that's a really good note, is like know the audience you're speaking to and what's going to get them interested and what's going to get their buy-in.
Yeah.
Amazing. We might go to the next ones from Michael. Do you have an example of how you would word that celebration that would give all applicants the psychological safety? So I think in the ad, we're referring to the advert. How would you word that?
I've replied to Michael already, so I've pointed him into a spot to have a look at it. So he's come back and give me the thumbs up there. So I replied in the chat to him.
You've been there, done that one. Thank you, Jen. Vicky, one from Vicky. I'm really interested to know if there are psychometric assessment suites that exist or are being developed by neurodiverse folk for neurodiverse folk. And how can this be worked in a non-discriminatory manner?
Over to you, Aaron.
Short answer, yes. I mean, 2018, we won $1 million challenge with Google, the Google Impact Challenge, and we stood up a entirely neurodivergent team to build skills-based assessments that would allow neurodivergent people a chance to demonstrate their skills. So yes, and Test Grid used them, so they offer them to the market.
Yep, amazing.
Dave, did you write that question?
Yeah.
Dave's Vicky. No, I love that. Thank you. Did you have anything you wanted to add, Dave?
Yeah, just we've been partnered with, was it 2021, Aaron, we got together. We've been offering exceptional assessments since then. The kind of core thing that we do is bring, with all our assessments, is into your existing hiring process and making that process as symbiotic as possible and as smooth as possible, both from the TA or HR perspective, customer side, also of course for the candidate experience side. So that's what we do with this.
Just very, very quickly, one thing about that process, which is really important, it not only allows people to demonstrate their skill, it also allows them space to say, hey, this is how I work best. This is how I like to give and receive feedback. This is how I like to have tasks assigned. It's giving people a little more agency over kind of how and where and what they do. And we're putting that information in front of employers.
Yeah, amazing. So good. We've got 3 minutes, so quick answer on this one. I don't know if this can be answered quickly, but we'll see how we go. With regards to emotional intelligence assessments, how is this data benchmarked and how is neurodiscrimination managed at the level of the data model? And that's from Tim. Does anyone want to answer that one?
One of the quicker ones. I'm not sure there's a quick answer for that. I'd encourage you. There's a guy called Paul who has a YouTube channel called Autism from the Inside. His specialty is emotional intelligence. I can't talk about it in relation to our assessments, but I'd go and check out Autism from the Inside as a platform in terms of emotional intelligence.
And I do think that it's just an interesting assumption that not this panel or necessarily any of the attendees, but a lot of people do make the assumption that there is a lack of EQ in neurodivergent people.
Yeah.
But actually, my experience is that people are gathering a lot of data, and so they're actually very astute observers of human behaviours and very reflective. Which is why I said to Exceptional, can we also send me a couple of candidates for a P&C role that I have hired through Exceptional, because just because we've got software engineers doesn't mean that they're the only folk that are out there with good skills. So actually I've found my absolute superstar in my P&C team is because of her neurodivergence. So that is her superpower.
I would add to that as well. In our business, we have over the different periods of time where we had different staff members, we always generally have people in the team who are neurodivergent, and we celebrate that if they're happy to share it. If they're not, it doesn't matter at all. But I would say I would hesitate against putting people in a box to say that everyone that has autism is therefore going to be in tech. And we know that there are some professions where people are, there's pathways that they're naturally wanting to follow in terms of the way that they might process information or the way that information is given to them. But I think you'll find that if you actually look at the pool of people in your businesses, if you look at the pool of people in your friendship group, in your kids' schools, like neurodivergence is absolutely everywhere. And I think it's just going to continue to be more part of the conversation as people grow in their own awareness and understanding. And I'm hoping that a lot of the, I would say, kind of discriminatory kind of attitude people have had towards this, like everyone's on the spectrum, it's a superpower, like these sorts of language where it's like, let's just stop assuming that we know what it is for every single person. And it is, everyone's different. Everyone's going to need different things. It's like, let's enable people to have the conversations themselves, actually advocate for themselves. So that's my final push.
What a note to end on. I love that.
That's great.
Thank you so much. We're at time. I really want to thank everyone for coming along and to our amazing panel speakers. We have recorded the event today. So we'll be sending out a recording at the end, along with all the resources we've talked about and links to everyone's profiles. Feel free to connect with all of us individually afterwards if you want to continue the conversation. And really loved the chat conversations that were going on. I was poking my head in and there was a lot of stuff in there. So it was really, really great. Last notes as well is that we do have the 2024 State of TA survey that's come out through ATC, and it's imperative that everyone jumps in if you're in TA and pop your thoughts and feelings in there so that they can get a read on what's happening across the talent acquisition industry. You also get a chance to win a ticket to the ATC 2024 event and $500 cash for everyone who gives their details. So wait, maybe that's not correct. That's what I've copied and pasted. I don't think everyone gets $500 cash that does the survey. Sorry, Lucy, and Joe, if you're listening. But yeah, you get to go into the chance to win those things. And also there are tickets available for ATC 2024. So I'll probably see you there. But yeah, thank you so much, everyone. That was amazing. And have the best day, the rest of your days.
Thanks very much.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.